Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to welcome you to al-Athar al-Islamiyyah. Today's lecture promises to be one of the most remarkable in our series. We are truly honored to have Professor Annie Caubet participating in the lecture series of al-Athar al-Islamiyyah. She is a distinguished French archaeologist and museum curator. Professor Caubet currently teaches at the École du Louvre and serves on the board of the Shelby White and Leo Levy publication program at Harvard University. From 1988 to 2006, she was the head of the Department of the Ancient Near East and the Louvre Museum. Her expertise, extensive field work in Syria, Cyprus, and Near Eastern sites have led to the creation of many exhibitions, including a future exhibition for the As-Sabah collection at the Kuwait National Museum, as well as the publication of numerous books. Her CV reflects a wealth of insightful publications. Tonight, Professor Caubet will be discussing a paper entitled The Art of Ivory in the Ancient World, from the Origins to Islam. Many are eager to learn more about this fascinating topic, so please join me in welcoming Professor Caubet.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. First of all, good night to all, and I would like to thank especially al-Athar for her kind welcome and hospitality. Thank all the extremely efficient team for all the organization. It's always a pleasure to work with such dedicated people. And also for me, it's very moving and quite a pleasure to be back in Kuwait, where I arrived just a little bit before 1980 to prepare several seasons of excavation that we did with a French and Kuwaiti team on the island of Failaka. So that was after the tragedy of the invasion. We also were a little bit involved in trying to restore the things. So it's always a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to future work in Kuwait, hopefully with younger people than me. First of all, let me change this so that you don't compare the original with the old picture. Actually, the topic of this of tonight talk was inspired by a masterpiece from this al-Sabah collection, the ivory pyxis or box that you have in the center of the screen, showing a fantastic animal, the unicorn. So I will tell you more about the unicorn. Man has used ivory to make works of art since the beginning of time. Prehistoric hunter-gatherers who lived by hunting mammoth, reindeer, and other animals used the bones and tusk of the mammoth to make hunting weapons and tools. Non-utilitarian artifacts in mammoth ivory expressed man's beginning of complex thought, man's attempt to propitiate a dangerous environment. In order to survive the challenge of fearsome animals and glacial climatic conditions, man resorted to magic and shamanism, sometimes turning himself into an animal man spirit, as in this mysterious lion man found in Germany and which is more than 40,000 years old. This lion man was accompanied by the earliest known music instrument, a flute, also made from a mammoth tusk. Music from this flute may have been part of some rituals, perhaps with dance, involving human masks as animals. Also, the constant preoccupation of man with fertility and the necessity of propagating the species was expressed early through the image of female figures. The exquisite lady from Brassempouy in the south of France, who is only 25,000 years old, wears a sophisticated cap, a head cap, and she is an early attempt at high fashion. Ivory working was, and still is, practically universal. It was, and still is, practiced in all 5 continents of the earth, from Asia to America. Ivory workshops were active in the hot climates of Black Africa, as well as in the very cold climates like Greenland or Canada, and also the mild climates of Europe and the Near East. Ivory was and still is a favorite medium for the expression of man's relation to God and creation. This is especially frequent in monotheistic religions. Buddhism and Christianism used images to teach the story of Buddha and of Christ, so that even people who could not read could also be able to understand the message, the lesson of moral example and redemption and humility. Ivory was often used for this image of the soft, because of the soft touch of the ivory, its white color, which was especially appropriate for the depiction of the Mother of God, and statues of Mary as a young mother holding the infant Jesus Christ fit perfectly within the natural shape of the elephant tusk, as you can see here. In Islam, of course, Islam did not allow figurative images, but many artifacts linked to the practice of religion were made of ivory, mihrab ornaments, minbar ornaments, windows, cases, lecterns for the Quran, incense dispensers, such as this one. They were decorated with geometric and vegetal motifs, often celebrating the beauty of nature as created by God. The main ornaments were the inscriptions, often prayers, invoking the name of God. A good example is in this incense box inscribed with a prayer in favor of Umayyad Caliph al-Hakam II, who was the successor of the great Abd al-Rahman III on the throne of al-Zahra in Spain, near Cordoba. In countries where ivory was not easily procurable locally, it was obtained either peacefully through trade or exchange, or violently through looting or tribute extortions. Tusk, together with other exotic and expensive goods, are often depicted on public monuments and also on portable artifacts commissioned by the rulers to display their power and their domination. From Egyptian pharaoh to Assyrian kings and much later, tribute bearers are shown carrying elephant tusk and other looted goods, or even sometimes bringing some tusk or even a younger elephant. The Roman emperors and their successors, the Byzantine, who were Christians, affirmed their power over the universe by commissioning images of themselves, of their conquests, showing barbarian people who had been conquered as bringing gifts of exotic goods and animals, among them elephant and ivory tusk, such as this on this book cover from a so-called Barberini diptych from 550 AD. The Roman emperor is shown on horseback, and he seems to spring out of the plaque at you. Now, a little bit of technique. What is ivory? Ivory is the material of a tusk, present in a number of animal species, the best known being the elephant and the prehistoric mammoth, now extinct. Other land animals with tusk are the hippopotamus and the boar. And you have a series of these animals. The hippopotamus lives near rivers and marshes, and was especially abundant in Egypt. Its ivory was worked by the Egyptian since pre-dynastic time, since the 4th millennium BC. During the 2nd millennium BC, before Christian era, ivory from hippopotamus, always a problem with hippo, I will say hippo, was a preferred material for ivory workers in Egypt, in the Levant, in Cyprus, in Greece, in Crete, especially Crete, to make seals, to make statues. This meant, of course, a network of exchange across the Mediterranean, because there is no elephant, no hippopotamus in Greece. And this trade took place next to the trade in copper, in the sense that the copper mines from Cyprus, which was sent to Egypt, and the cedar from Lebanon, which was sent from Lebanon to Anatolia and Mesopotamia. Also the boar and other Swedes in Africa and Europe and Asia have short tusks, which are protected by a very thick layer of shining enamel, and helmets such as this one, made of several layers of plaque cut from the boar tusk, have been found in the second millennium from sites of the second millennium BC in Crete, in Greece. And these helmets are described by the epics of the Greek poet Homer, who lived in the 7th century BC. Among the marine, the sea mammals are the walrus and the sperm whale, who also have a consistent big teeth, which are of interest for ivory working. And let's go to the narwhal, the English narwhal. It's a name. It's a Danish name. But it's a real animal that lived in the sea of the north, of the northern Europe, and it's remarkably possessed with one long tusk, which is in the shape like a spear, which they used to break the ice, so that they could, because they are mammals, they had to go out and breathe. So they would use their spear to breathe the ice. This, of course, inspired the legend of the unicorn, which does not exist, often depicted as a white horse with one horn in the center of the forehead, as a horn. As a symbol of purity and chastity, the unicorn took part in many romances in the medieval times, as shown on the tapestry and on the beautiful ivory box, where you have those two unicorns fighting with each other. The dugong, which is a special interest for Kuwait because it lives in the Gulf and in the Indian Ocean. It's a mammal. It looks like a big cushion. It looks like nothing, but it has little teeth. They were hunted in the Gulf since the 3rd millennium BC. A killing site was excavated in the Oman island of Abkhaz, near the Detroit of Hormuz. And it revealed a cultic mound of dugong bones and tusk and cranium, carefully assembled and interspaced with beads and pottery offerings dating from the 5th millennium BC and imported from Mesopotamia. So the dugong tusks are small and they are rarely been used by man, but there is one exceptional example which shows a Sumerian votive statuette, probably dated from the 3rd millennium BC. How to identify the different species of ivory? Because I told you, mammal, hippopotamus, walrus, etc. All ivory come from tusk of these various animals, and because they are tusk, they have teeth. They grow with age, like a tree, and unlike the teeth of man. The growth produces a pattern of lines, and which are able to be identified by a specialist. You have one example of my colleague François Poplin here. And you see the growth line on the plaque, which has been worked in the 7th century BC. The growth lines creates a pattern which is different for each species. They are best seen on cross-section of a tusk. Here are examples of a cross-section of an elephant tusk, which has a characteristic crisscross pattern. Also, the walrus tusk have a very interesting pattern in the center. And curiously, the walrus tusk, which is an animal living in the northern European Sea, has been much used by the Ottoman as a hilt for weapons, etc. So it's a kind of trade between the Mediterranean and Turkey with the northern Europe in the 16th century. Why does it matter to identify the ivory? There are many look-alike materials, mainly bone and marine shell, also the egg shell of ostriches, the turtle shell, coral, others, and there is even cutting Sherausa carpet under her feet, also vegetal ivory. But these are not ivory, they are imitation. And now, of course, the best imitation is plastic. I'm not going to talk about that. All of these materials are soft to touch with the white coloring, and they have been worked by man since prehistory to produce artifacts which often have the same function and the same prestige as the real ivory. The bones of hunted and domesticated animals were the earliest work by man. It may be used by great artists and workshops. It's not an inferior material, and such great artists of the Renaissance in Italy used butchery bones from the leg of beef to produce these things, and you see they are not very narrow plaque, and you have to think it's in terms, these are plaque taken from the leg of a butchered beef. Also, the flat bones, like the hip of large animal, can be used to produce things, extraordinary things like the saddle, which is a specialty of Prague in the 16th century, and they were very famous all over Europe. Another material that looks very much like ivory, and sometimes the confusion is made in the inventory of the museum collection, are the seashells. They were sometimes collected for themselves, for their sheer beauty, but also they could be made into artifacts. The central axis of a conical shell, for instance, provide enough material to cut a small statuette or singular seals, and there are many examples. I'll show you examples from Mesopotamia. And of course, the inside of some seashells is covered with a luminous and pearly layers, which is nacre, which is used as inlay for wood furniture and casket, such as this beautiful Ottoman chest. Going back to ivory, if you want to work on the ivory, an elephant tusk. There are anatomical characteristics which have been exploited by man in a similar fashion across time and space. Because they are teeth, the tusk therefore have a natural cavity for the nerve and the dental pulp. That's where it hurts when you are sick, when the animal is alive. In the case of the elephant tusk, craftsmen used differently the solid part of the tusk and the part around the cavity. The solid part may be carved into three-dimensional sculptures. So you see on top here. Oops. There we go. And around the cavity, its best use is to produce tubular pieces. The best example is the oliphant, a musical instrument, a kind of trumpet or horn, known in many different civilizations. The solid part of the tusk may be cut into plaque, lengthwise, which in turn may be sculpted in relief. And from the same segment of the tusk, several plaques parallelly may be obtained. The largest is at the center, and the smaller at the outside of both sides. And this is how polyptychs were made, and we call polyptych little plaque with several wings like this. You may have 3 wings like this one, sometimes 5 wings. It's typical of the Christian worship. And of course, the part of the tusk around the cavity can be made into the horn, but also in smaller part you may be cut into obtained cylinders, and sometimes several cylinders may be cut from the cavity, and the lowest is the thinnest. And there are examples dating from the Bronze Age to Islam, from Greece to the Near East, from Europe, etc. It's a natural shape to obtain from an elephant tusk. Now, how about Ivory and society. Ivory was very often used as a privileged medium for the expression and celebration of the various aspects of the life of man, its many pleasures and occupations. Like gold and the precious stones, ivory was a highly symbolic material. Its value was, of course, based on several factors. It was dangerous to procure. It needed valor and courage to confront the mighty beasts. It came from afar, invoking exotic and mysterious lands. It required rulers to control distant trade routes. Therefore, its possession signaled power. Another aspect was the feminine connotation. On account of its color, its soft touch, ivory was often compared to beautiful women. Poets would sing the beauty of the loved one, describing her neck as a column of ivory. I'm reading just two short passages. One from a cuneiform tablet of the 12th century BC, found at Ugarit, that reads, "My lady is beauty. My lady, like sunlight on the horizon, is a stag in a mountain, a morning star shining at noon, an alabaster statue standing on lapis lazuli, a column of ivory full of charm." And another example taken from the Bible, and I'm sure I should have taken it from Islamic poetry, but I'm not very good at that. From the Bible in the Song of Songs, supposedly wrote by Solomon. "How beautiful your sandaled feet, O princess daughter. Your graceful legs are like jewels. Your neck is like an ivory tower. Your eyes are like the pools of Heshbon." Ivory, being associated with love and beauty, appears often on artifacts that celebrate the many pleasures of life and love. It was used to make the equipment needed to enhance beauty, boxes and cases for cosmetics, combs, mirrors, caskets for jewelry, makeup. Examples range from the 2nd millennium BC with a handle of mirror showing a lady looking at herself in a mirror. I particularly like this picture because I excavated it in Cyprus 25 years ago. And it is made of hippopotamus ivory. And next to it, the comb of Queen Bertha is a German lady who lived in the 12th century CE, an example of a comb made for a queen. And the refined jewelry casket in al-Sabah collection is a nice example of ivory which is painted instead of being engraved. Of course, feasting, eating, drinking occupied a major part of social life in ancient times and maybe now, and were narrated during those feasting. Epic songs and poems were sung. Images of the banquets and the guests were depicted on the very vessel and implements that were used for the feasting and of the elite, bringing larger storage vats and jars, jugs, cups. Some of these implements themselves, not only the drinking cup, were made of ivory or other precious materials. On a plaque from Megiddo, dated to the 12th century BC, servants are bringing wine or beer from a large vat, supporting animal-shaped vessels, which may have been themselves made of ivory. This is a beautiful ivory plaque. And they serve a deity or a ruler seated on the throne. Servants bring drinks from pitchers, like the one on this plaque from al-Athar. This plaque was probably the decoration of a throne, a seat for ritual feasting. Feasting and banqueting were often accompanied by music and dance. You have several examples. One from a mirrored disc made in Paris in the 13th century AD CE shows couples dancing to the sound of a lyre. And the lyre is interesting because it's an instrument that was created in Mesopotamia during the 3rd millennium BC. So it's a lyre, which we still use now, as an instrument which is more than 5,000 years old. And it's still The handles of the lyre were often made of ivory themselves, if not wood. And many other music instruments were completely or partially made of ivory, especially the horns that we have already seen, the oliphant, and the clappers. Which are the best use you can make of the hippopotamus canine, and it imitates the hands and the arms of the people who rhythmed the dance. Playing games was also an important part of life, and the elite played on boards made of luxurious material, ivory and exotic wood. The Egyptian game of senet was played on 20 case, was widely popular all over the ancient Near East throughout the second millennium and the first millennium BC. And much later, the game of chess was imported from India and the Near East, sometime at the early first, around the Hegira, was imported into Europe. And I'm showing on the left early example of a chessman made in England or Denmark in the 10th century of Christian era. So to show not only the longue durée, but also the long distance between from India to Denmark. Because games are uncertain, they are ruled by chance. Game playing was also a metaphor for fate and the brevity of life, and often had a funerary significance. The hunt ivory was closely associated with hunt and war. It was a material of luxury weapons, such as the hilt of swords, daggers, the fitting of chariots, the shafts of spears and arrows for the elite. Hunting scenes were a frequent motif on ivory artifacts of the elite, such as this gaming board from Enkomi in Cyprus, dated second millennium BC. Its top is engraved with a senet game of 20 case, and the side depicts a ruler in a chariot drawn by galloping horses with his dogs, and it's tracking bulls and gazelle. And that you have here the connection between the game, the hunt, and the objective, the game playing, the hunt, and the ivory. The art of hunting with falcon, which is well known, was introduced from the Arab world into Europe in medieval times. It is frequently depicted on ivory artifacts. This mirror disc, made in Paris, shows a loving couple engaged in a hunt with a falcon. So you have ivory, the love, music, and falcon. The hunt takes place to the sound of a hunting horn, again the oliphant, an old French word. And you have here the example of a horn made in Sicily, a court of Sicily during the 12th century BC was a cultural hub where Muslims and Christian artists were welcomed together to develop a very distinctive artistic style. War. Propaganda images depicting a ruler vanquishing his enemies are practically as old as humanity. Mesopotamia and Egypt early developed stereotypes of a king triumphant on foot or on horseback or on a chariot. Scenes were repeated on monuments, the walls of palaces and temples, and the portable artifacts, such as these ivory thrones or beds or cases. Here is a detail. No, that was still. Sorry. Here is a detail of the bed from Ugarit, again dated to the second millennium BC, where the triumphant ruler pierces the eyes of a defeated foe, whom he sees by the tuft of his hair. And this is a motif which was born in Egypt, actually. There. And on the Megiddo plaque, the ruler here is leading ahead of him, ahead of his chariot, prisoners who are humiliated and naked. Arms and armors and chariot fittings and horse equipments were made of wood, ivory, and precious metal, or in Damask technique, in many different civilizations across time and space. A few examples. You have a horse blinker found in the Assyrian capital of Nimrud. It probably was attached to a leather on the head of the horse. We have already seen that extraordinary saddle, which is 16th century Christian era, and the hilt of his dagger from South Asia. This is made, which happens to be made of walrus ivory. Now, part 3, war elephant and some famous elephants. The Asian elephant was domesticated and tamed in India during antiquity. We don't know exactly when, but probably around 1000 BC. It was used as a royal mount, mostly for parade, but probably also for hunting and war. When the Persian king Darius conquered India in the 6th century BC, he made it part of a vast Persian empire, and Persian rulers trained themselves, learned how to train elephants to go to war and terrorize the enemy. And of course, after that, when the great conqueror Alexander the Great, conquered the East, seeking the mirage of India and Persia, it's an extraordinary expedition. He brought Persia and India under Greek rule for several centuries. Alexander had to confront the war elephant, and especially at the exploit at the Battle of Hydaspes in 326 BC was celebrated by coins minted either by Alexander himself or his successors, and it shows a tiny Alexander on horseback attacking the huge elephant of the Indian ruler, who was named, we know the name as Porus. And after his death, when Alexander had become a hero, the successor was admired in all the West and the East, a model to imitate by rulers of the future Greek, all the rulers of the future. Greek rulers, his successor in the East, notably in Bactria, expressed themselves on their coin as victors of India, wearing on their head the scalp of an elephant. This, of course, very unlikely coiffure. I mean, there's no way that they had actually happened. By these propaganda images, the Greek successors of Alexander represent themselves as superhuman, bigger than life, as semi-divine beings. The Greek dynasty of the Seleucids then appropriate the ancient myth of the return of the god Dionysus from India. According to legend, Dionysus returned from India in triumph, bearing animals, exotic animals and elephants. And on this model, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies shown themselves driving chariots drawn by 4 elephants. Again, it's impossible. It's a symbolic image. The Seleucids who reigned in Syria had shown themselves drawing Asian elephants, and the Ptolemies in Egypt boasted that they had conquered the African elephant, which is even more difficult to do. And the motif was adopted in Rome for the benefit of the Roman emperor. Elephant chariot drawn by 4 elephants were represented on public monuments in Rome. We know from the text that there was one on top of the triumphal arch of Titus in the Roman Forum, and there was one on the gate of entrance to the port of Rome, and this is from a presentation on a relief, votive relief. Carthage in Tunisia in the 3rd century before Christ was an Hellenized kingdom who modeled itself on the Ptolemies of Egypt, while retaining some of its ancient Phoenician and Punic traditions. Like the Ptolemies, Carthage maintained herds of war elephants, and during the Punic War between Rome and Carthage, Hannibal decided to attack Rome. His crossing of the Alps with his war elephants was an extraordinary military feat that durably impressed the Romans, who, however, managed to defeat the Punic troops at Cana in 216 BC. So you have here the parcours of the animals' travel. Now, war elephant in Arabia We all know that in Arabia, a brilliant civilization flourished during the 6th century BC, just before the Hijra, before the arrival of Islam, in contact with the neighboring empires, the Sassanid and the Byzantine. And according to the Quran, King Abra of Aksum was stopped in his aborted conquest of Arabia by the refusal of his own war elephant, probably called Mansur, to proceed further. So that is the history from the Quran. And there are real inscriptions on the rocks in Najran of King Abra, which I found recently, telling of his military activities in the course of a religious conflict between Christians and Jews. We don't know if he does not mention elephant, to be completely honest. But Abra had modeled himself on the great tradition of the Ptolemies, who had lorded upon Egypt and the Red Sea, like he was, using war elephants for propaganda and tactical purpose. Rock engravings near Najran are evidence of the enduring impression left by the passage of this huge beast. And there is also a few other images. This is a mosaic from a Sukuk, north of Tiberias Lake, showing a war elephant all complete with military equipment, a harness, protective, had a kind of protective collar and shields, which is a witness at the same time of Abra of the passage of his war elephants in that region. In the Roman Empire, the elephant retained its symbolism as a metaphor for domination. But the Roman practice of circus games changed the paradigm. Huge circus were built all over the empire, from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. I mean, everywhere Rome ruled, circus were built. And exotic animals, including elephants, lions, panthers, were brought to fight in the arena. And they, of course, became familiar to the general public and the artists. And we know from numerous wall paintings and mosaics that adorn public monuments that scenes of public games. Elephants were symbol of triumph over in the circus game, but it was a triumph of Rome. Now, about elephant in al-Andalus, the prestige of Alexander, as we know, endured long after his death. He became a hero, both in the Persian tradition, the Syriac tradition, and the Arabic tradition, under the name of Iskander. And in the Quran, he probably is known as Du Cornein, on account of his coins that showed him with the horns of the god Ammon. Early Arabic romance, like Qissat al-Iskander, Alexander is the hero of many inspiring anecdotes. This posterity may explain why Arabic rulers took him for model, continuing the tradition of the elephant of parade that bestowed exoticism, majesty, and power to the persona of the king. On this ivory pyxis, commissioned by his daughter after his death, King Abdul Rahman III, who built his capital al-Zahra in Spain, is depicted on a throne supported by an elephant, which of course conveys a special grandeur to the dead sovereign. Another famous elephant in the European tradition is the gift of the elephant by Harun al-Rashid to the Roman Emperor Charlemagne. Desiring to reopen trade and relation with the Islamic world, Emperor Charlemagne, around 800 AD CE, sent an embassy to Baghdad, and the Caliph Harun al-Rashid gave an elephant in return. The choice of the animal as a gift between two great sovereigns, who were very aware that they were great kings, was in keeping with the long tradition of royal prestige attached to the possession of such a beast. The elephant, we know, was named Abul Abbas, traveled from Baghdad to Egypt, but by what route we don't know, and along the coast to Egypt, to Afriqiya, From a harbor, perhaps Carthage, they sailed to Italy, landing at Porto Venere. We have all this. We have text to document this story. And the convoy crossed the Alps, as Hannibal had done 700 years before, but in the opposite direction. Hannibal had gone south, and Abu Labas went south-north across. Eventually, arrived in the capital in Germany, at the capital of Charlemagne, who took the beast along in his battles against the Danes, and the elephant died in 1810 somewhere in North Germany or South Denmark. Poor thing, must have died of cold. Rulers of the ancient Near East had maintained royal hunting reserves watered by canals and pools where exotic animals lived in a green and leafy environment. There is archaeological evidence for such reserves, animal reserves, royal zoo, in Syria and Mesopotamia since the 2nd millennium BC. Persian rulers, after the time of Darius, were especially fond of such splendid garden, which we called pardes in Persia. There are traces at Parsagade, capital of Cyrus. And the Farsi word pardes passed into the Greek word paradisos to designate such royal gardens. But with the emergence of Christianism, a long process, paradise, came to mean the Garden of Eden and the paradise which was promised to the faithful. It is interesting that the hope of humanity, this is a hunting by the Sasanian hunt, which is typical. It is interesting that the hope of mankind for afterlife and was envisioned by artists of the early Christian and Islam in the same appearance, an oriental garden protected and enclosed into curlicues, foliage, and arabesque. You have here 2 Christian examples, and here you have Islamic from Spain. In Spain, in Sicily and Egypt, the same artists, the same workshop executed those masterpieces for both Christians and Muslims. Here, wild and fierce felines are seen peacefully next to sweet gazelles and birds. The elephant is often present, and as a long tradition, the elephant means a triumph, a royal triumph, except that this is a triumph of faith. Thank you.